Welcome to Wideout Wednesday on the Podcast Daily. That is William Landis. I am Austin Ward. Those are all the W's.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It's a lot. It's a lot to handle. But we're going to try and throw a big dub on the board here for you all with this latest position review and preview. Ohio State's wide receivers were good, and they're going to be good. And do you need more than that?
See you later. Yeah, I mean it's the same song and dance every year, I guess, when we talk about this position group. I guess it's a little more I don't know, slightly more out of the ordinary, I guess, to have someone who's as dynamic as Jeremiah Smith is back for 2 more years, which is kind of crazy to think about. But yeah, they reload. There's no rebuilding. There's no rebuilding at Ohio State generally, but there's definitely no rebuilding in Brian Hartline's receiver room.
I don't know if I've said this before. I probably have. I bet I said it like 5 years in a row. I don't know how they can keep getting away with this. Like the standard thinks it looks like it's unreachable. There's no way. That's unsustainable. You lose Marvin Harrison's like, well, here comes Jeremiah Smith. Watch this. Like that was bonkers. And now they're going to lose Emeka Egbuka. And it's like, oh, well, you saw a taste of Brandon Ennis. You bring Carnell Tate back. Oh, and by the way, here's Mylan Graham, who every time they practice and we get to watch it, or every time somebody pops into the Woody to get to see the next wave of wide receivers, like this guy is going to be phenomenal. It's like, I don't know if it's properly appreciated how ridiculous it is. I think everyone appreciates the fact that it is incredibly good and the best wide receiver room in the country. But the fact that it is continually elevating every single year just seems like it's almost taken for granted.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's hard not to. Even I'm guilty of that at times. Just like we're breaking down Ohio State's roster. It's like, okay, well, receivers are fine. Like we don't even have to talk about them. Like, and it's a testament to what Brian Hartline has built there and the players, establishing that just sort of culture of excellence in that room. I think we've talked about this, right? It'll be more difficult, I think, to not be good. I think they're always going to be good as long as Brian Hartline is going to be here. They're always going to have a guy or 2 or 3 probably that is in that conversation for best like 5 to 10 receivers in the sport. But in like the salary cap era, I guess, of college football, maybe you don't bring in 5 of the top 8 receivers every recruiting class kind of thing. So I think that'll be a different reality for Ohio State. I guess that the thing that I would always take solace in, because I don't say that to worry Ohio State fans about anything, is like Brian Hartline is going to get like the right 2 or 3. So they'll be more than fine moving forward. Maybe there just won't be those classes where like I said, there's like look at the receiver rankings and you see 4 Ohio State logos there. Like that could be a little different, but they're always going to have a dude or dudes. I'm curious to see like if they start to take more swings on some like underrated, under the radar kind of guys and develop them into really good players, maybe even in the course of a couple of years, which is not something we see a whole lot of typically in this room. You're either ready to go immediately like Jeremiah Smith was, or you're ready to go by year 2 like Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka were. So maybe a slightly different dynamic there, but still operating in the upper echelon, unrivaled, I think, when it comes to receiver play around the country.
Yeah, and I think that's a fascinating dynamic, and Brian Hartline has talked a little bit about this. Ryan Day has as well. Like, if you're building out the recruiting classes and the signing classes, to your point, 1 and 2 of the top 5 in the country are probably always going to be flocking to play for Ohio State and for Ryan Day and for Brian Hartline. But the years of it being maybe 4 of the top 10 are probably gone, and there's a lot of factors for that. Playing time and NIL. This is one position where I think maybe the talent can be more evenly dispersed across the country. I think people already have an understanding that you should pay for really good wide receivers. But I wonder how much of this could be like a Jeremiah Smith outlier. Like once he's gone and he is clearly the preeminent wide receiver in the country, could Ohio State divvy up that salary in a different way to get back to the point where they bring in 4 or 5 really good ones? Is this just a unique situation where he's going to command so much more of the quote unquote salary cap than everybody else that they need to take some of these swings, or does someone like Bodpin Miller become a staple part of the class every single year, where you're hoping to hit and that you develop to the next level? I don't know the answer to that. I think that is probably the most intriguing part of the way that this roster at wide receiver is set up into the future.
Yeah, that's actually a good thing to point out, because I don't know. I would say, like, at least at Ohio State, maybe it is a kind of a unique window, because Ohio State is not really in the business of like overpaying. I don't think, like, they're competitive, but within reason. So like, I'm sure that there are going to be players who think they're going to get Jeremiah Smith money, but they're not going to be Jeremiah Smith. And maybe they'll get it from someplace else, but I don't think like a receiver who's multiple degrees worse than Jeremiah is looking for similar kind of money is going to find it in Columbus. So I guess like 2 years down the road, when that cap number is off the books, it's so weird to talk about college football in these terms. Maybe Ohio State could get back to that, because it's not like there's going to be very good receivers. You know, they're like Chris Henry Jr. is an awesome receiver, but like, I don't know that he's quite to the level of a Jeremiah. And I think guys like that who would command those kind of resources are still maybe few and far between. If we're going to be, I guess, a little less liberal with a generational term that I do think applies to Jeremiah, but doesn't apply to like every kid who's the number one receiver in the class year over year. So maybe, and even if, I mean, honestly, even if it's not, Burnham says it all the time, right? As long as Brian Hartline is at Ohio State's going to get the cream of the crop of receivers and probably get who it wants more often than not. So it's nothing to worry about. It's just it's a slightly different dynamic, I guess, to work around.
Well, I think that the Brian Hartline factor is where the most intrigue lies for the wide receivers this year. Like, if he is the primary play caller the way that we expect him to be by the time the fall rolls around, what does that mean for his day-to-day responsibilities in terms of development? The recruiting part, he's always going to be responsible for that. I think we know that, and we can set that part to the side. But part of what has made them successful, Ohio State successful, in this lineage of first-round draft picks and wildly successful NFL receivers, has been, you're taking 5 stars, but they are also continually improving and aren't just finished products on the day that they arrive. So the hands-on development part, I think, is interesting. And how much of that now, Ryan Day had to give up some responsibility to Chip Kelly, and he's doing that now with Brian Hartline. Will Brian Hartline then do the same in turn with Devin Jordan and the rest of the coaching staff when it comes to getting through practice number 1 or practice 15 or going through the week in September and October? Like, how much does that change? And will we see any difference in that? I guess we get so into the weeds because we talk about Ohio State football 365 days of the year, but like, that's a pretty key component of this. And if Brian Hartline's actual job responsibilities change in the room, that bears monitoring. And I wonder how Ohio State's going to handle all that.
Yeah, I wonder how much of the last 2 years and what's felt like a slow build to Brian Hartline actually taking over play calling was just that, like, figuring that part of it out. And I guess you can't totally figure it out until you're doing it, but they at least had that spring 2 years ago where Hartline was like, I guess, like on a path to play calling before Ryan Day kind of changed course there, where he got to work through some of that. And I think, he's had a pretty important role in game planning the last 2 years. And it sounds like especially this past season, and definitely toward the end of the year and in the postseason. So I don't know if it'll be super challenging for him, but even all that being said, like, it is different sort of having it all on your plate, like not like dipping a toe in, being able to walk out if you need to, the kind of thing. Like, it's a lot of responsibility. Brian Hartline doesn't strike me as somebody who would take on the responsibility unless he believed wholeheartedly that he could do it. Nor do I think Ryan Day would give him the opportunity to, if he didn't believe wholeheartedly that he could do it. But it's just the next progression in being a coach. I guess you got to figure that out. Like Ryan Day, I get it's easier to do it with the quarterback, and there's like a more sort of like natural way that like things line up there if you're the quarterback's coach and the play caller, and your room is smaller, you're not coaching as many players. Like it's all different. But I don't think it's impossible as long as Brian Hartline understands what he's getting into. And I think I would imagine anyway that he has a pretty good idea of what that's going to be like.
Okay. So you have 2 options then as we shift away from Brian Hartline to the actual roster here at wide receiver. Do you just want to talk about how good Jeremiah Smith can be in year 2, or should we shift to what's next for Brandon Ennis and Mylan Graham?
Probably the latter. Like, how many different ways can we say that Jeremiah Smith is awesome? I think we all know that. And again, I'm interested in what it looks like for him. Like, it's gonna be like the Joey Bosa year where if they had 3 guys blocking him in 2015, like that's gonna be Jeremiah Smith's life for the next 2 years.
Right.
So he'll have to work through that, but I believe that he'll be able to. Yeah, what happens around him, I think is more interesting, but beyond that, like important for Ohio State, right? They have to figure out the right pieces to put around Jeremiah Smith, and you start with Carnell Tate, and you feel pretty good about that, I think. But then it's like, okay, who's that third guy? I guess in hindsight, it makes sense that he didn't. I was anticipating like a little bit of a larger role from Brandon Ennis this past year, and not that he didn't have, like, he had some role, right? He was out there for some pretty important snaps. Penn State game, playoff, all that stuff. And I thought always kind of answered the bell when asked to, and I think that's hard too, to kind of like stay ready even when you're not out there all the time. So I found that to be pretty impressive. It's just, and I guess that would give you confidence too. Like if you're going to say, well, now he's going to play, 6 times that amount of snaps this year, whatever it's going to end up being. So I feel good about him. I guess I just wish we would have seen him a little more this year. Bryson Rogers still remains a bit of a mystery to me. Mylan Graham, I'm excited about him as anybody, but we didn't see him a whole lot on the field this past year. So I see no shortage of like good options, I think, for that third receiver spot. And if you're naming a leader, I think you'd have to name Brandon Ennis that guy. But I could also see that being pretty darn competitive from here, even like through camp in August, because I think Bryson Rogers will bring that mindset. I think Mylan Graham will bring that mindset. Maybe some of these freshmen coming in who don't know any better are going to push some guys too for jobs. So I think for a room that returns somebody who is as well known as Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, I would lump him in there too. Maybe there's an opportunity for this to be as competitive of an offseason that we've seen from the receiver room in a while.
It's a really interesting dynamic there with, if you're talking lead by example and what we mentioned last week with the winter workouts, and like, can Jeremiah become a more vocal leader? Is that even necessary for him? It might not be, because people are going to follow his cue when it comes to work ethic and practice habits and all those things, because everyone, I think, would want to aspire to be like the number 1 wide receiver in the country, which it's not just on genetics alone. I think everyone has talked about the way he approaches the day-to-day business, like as an off the charts level. But like when it comes to the vocal part, he may not have to handle that, because Brandon Ennis was already doing that for Ohio State. Like Emeka was a captain, key component, always said the right things. And anytime we saw practice or being around the locker room, anything like that, no one would question it. But Emeka wasn't doing that by himself either, because Brandon Ennis was on the leadership committee, and I think that was one of the like overlooked parts. Like what was the way that they always phrased it, Bill? Like you felt Brandon Ennis out there. Ryan Day would say that all the time, and like, so I think that helps too. Jeremiah is going to be Jeremiah, and if somebody then has to fill the Emeka Egbuka role, not just on the field but off the field, Brandon Ennis is right there to do that.
I think he's definitely ready for it. But I guess I just want it to be said, because you want to talk about like taking things for granted, or maybe not quite appreciating things as much as maybe we should have as they were happening. It's like Emeka Egbuka is going to be hard to replace. Yeah. He's a really good player, like I think an excellent leader, just like a pro, kind of about everything in his life that I thought set a great example for that room. And I'm not like worried that they're not going to be able to find that in other guys. I guess I just want to like make sure we have it on the table how important he was, because there definitely were times throughout his career where, like, I've heard people say, like, I'm not sure he's that, like, less or more people who like actually aren't Ohio State fans, but say like, is that Emeka Egbuka guy really that good? Or like, he gets a lot of talk for a guy who's like kind of in the shadows. Like, well, he played with Marvin Harrison Jr. and then he played with Jeremiah Smith. And by the way, alongside both of them, he found a way to get 1,000 yards. So like, he's pretty good. So it's a lot of production, a lot of targets out there to replace, obviously, but there's some intangible stuff there that Ohio State's going to have to make up for. But to your point, I do believe that Brandon Ennis is well equipped to take up a lot of that.
And some of that, operating in the shadows is already occurring with Carnell Tate and did occur a year ago. You know, I prefaced the two options for you as like the next wave or Jeremiah, and like Carnell's right there in the middle. Like probably just even the way that I'm, you know, talking about it now, like taken for granted. Like I know how good he is, and I think any other team that doesn't have Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate is bona fide number one, Bolitnikoff Trophy finalist caliber player. I think we see that a lot. And like year one was slowed a little bit by the foot injury. Year two, it's just I think sheer numbers. Ohio State played at a slower tempo, lower and slower, so they didn't throw it a lot during the regular season. When they had to make big plays and when they force fed it to Carnell Tate like they did at Wrigley Field against Northwestern, those were reminders of how elite he is as well. So like that, it's another part I think of this conversation where even individuals get taken for granted as well as the room as a whole. Like keeping Carnell Tate was critical for Ohio State. They ponied up to do so because around the rest of college football, there was certainly an awareness that maybe you could find some crack there that you can offer enough money and more spotlight to get him out away from Brian Hartline in Ohio State. And there was, I think, legitimate fear that that could happen in the 5 days after the national championship. But the good news for Ohio State fans is that in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, there was no complacency about Carnell Tate's importance.
I mean, what an endorsement of his abilities that Ohio State did pony up to keep him, right? And I don't think they did it to save face. I think they did it because they think he's going to be awesome. Because like if any place, I don't want this to come out the wrong way. If there was any place that was able to say like, congratulations, you're getting a nice number. We're not going to pay that because we have other good receivers. We wish you good luck in your future endeavors. It's Ohio State, and they didn't do that because I think they see something special in Carnell clearly. And there's stuff beyond football there too that I know we're all aware. There's a connection there between Carnell and the staff that's like palpable and important and played a role in that too. But he's a heck of a football player, man. And I know like compared to Jeremiah and Emeka, I guess like he didn't really go off this season, but nearly every time they had to go to him in big moments or in games where teams were trying to steer the action in Carnell's direction, he stepped up and performed. And he's going to go through like an entire season of that now with the way that Jeremiah is going to be defended. And I think he's ready for that. And I think Ohio State knows that too. So, and he's like, he's although he seemed to come out of his shell a little bit, I guess, like toward the end of the year, but he's like a kind of quieter work ethic kind of guy, set the example, set the tone too. So they're not hurting for that. And I think even if Jeremiah is like not out there with his personality, although I bet you see him in a billion commercials between now and the start of the college football season, they have everything they need. Like, I don't even know. You look up and down that room and say like, boy, I wish they had this. Like, I couldn't possibly fathom what that could be. Like they're loaded like they always are.
I do think, I mean, yes, Jeremiah's going to be out there in a way that I don't know. We said it a year ago in the summer, like the fanfare and the expectations and the Heisman Trophy campaign and everything else that those could happen for a true freshman. And like, they're going to absolutely happen after his true freshman season. And now he's like going to Monaco for the Grand Prix, and like Red Bull's taking him out to, like that's my understanding anyway, that that is available to him as a Red Bull sponsor. And as a Red Bull racing fan, I'd love to go with him and go down to the paddock to see Max Verstappen, but I don't know if that will happen. But this will sound like hyperbole, and I don't know if you agree with it or not.
I don't think hyperbole is possible.
Yeah, a year ago, like I wasn't tapping the brakes on it as much as like keeping my foot around it, like because it felt like too much for a true freshman. But now that we've all seen it, I think there's going to be a level of celebrity for Jeremiah Smith that has never happened in college football. And maybe you'd say, well, Johnny Manziel or Tim Tebow are right in this conversation, and I'd say, sure, that's true. But considering the amount of money that is now involved and what he did as an 18-year-old, this may well be unprecedented.
And it all, like, I guess what differentiates Jeremiah from like a Tebow or a Johnny is like it's all what happens on the field. Like I mean this in no bad way towards Jeremiah. Like at least like publicly, like he's not Mr. Personality. He's not out there. He's not Jeremiah football. You know what I mean? Like so it's all just like otherworldly talent and like truly, at least from a true freshman, something we've never seen before. Now the bar is incredibly high, and he's going to get scrutinized a ton. I guess like if people perceive that he's not meeting these incredibly lofty expectations, but yeah, the celebrity is going to be there for sure. And it was there as a freshman, and he seemed to handle it well. And it'll be more magnified throughout the rest of his career. But I think he's got like the right mindset and the right people around him to handle it just fine.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess I would suggest if defensive coordinators out there think that he can't handle it, or he's not living up to those expectations, then they should just play single coverage on him and see what happens. I mean, that's back it up if that's because there's going to be corners that want to talk trash and that want to measure themselves against Jeremiah, and that's great. But like, don't go then talk about it afterwards if you get a bunch of safety help or triple coverage on Jeremiah Smith. Like, that's the part that I think it's going to be crazy to watch. Like you mentioned, the Bosa rules and the blocking schemes that they saw. I wonder what else is out there to even try and neutralize Jeremiah, because of the rest of what we're talking about with this room, with Carnell Tate, with Brandon Ennis, if Mylan Graham or Bryson Rodgers take that next step, not even factoring in what could happen at tight end or what happens at running back. Like, there are so many answers that still exist just at wide receiver. Like, how much effort and attention are you actually going to put into trying to take away Jeremiah if Ohio State can beat you so many other ways? I don't know what the solution is, or if there is one.
Yeah, I don't know that there is. Like, I'm envisioning a lot of like, we shut down Jeremiah because we had 3 defenders on him. I was like, oh, did you win the game? No, we lost 42-17, and Brandon Ennis scored twice, and Carnell Tate scored 3 times. But boy, Jeremiah only had 5 catches. It's like, okay,
yeah.
Hope it was worth it.
I mean, that is there. That might have to be some of the recalibration, which was the Bosas did not have Chase Young production or 20 sacks in a season, but you knew that they were the most impactful players, defensive ends on the field, because of the attention that they were getting. And it set up the rest of the team for success. And I think that would be the next element of appreciation for Jeremiah Smith, is if people actually pay attention to that and don't just box score watch him, because I think it's probably going to be difficult for him to post the kind of numbers that he would be capable of by seeing single coverage, which is like 100 catches and 2,000 yards. Like, he could do that, but he's not going to have opportunities for that. So I think it'll be a test, I think, for people who are actually paying attention.
Yeah. And Ohio State fans, at the very least, I think have been through it enough to know what that looks like and how important like that gravity is, I guess, for the entire operation. But I guess brace yourselves now for if he's like for like national people or whatever other fan base is like, oh, Jeremiah Smith's not any good. He only has 45 catches 7 games into the season. It's like, well, he also set up the other 300 catches that Ohio State has.
Yeah. So in summation, Jeremiah Smith is good. Carnell Tate is good. Brandon Ennis, we'd like to see him play more, but he's good. I really think Mylan Graham, I'm excited to watch. I don't know how many practices we're going to get to see in March and April, but I bet that Mylan Graham like steals the show in 3 of them. And I'm excited to see what that looks like. So yeah, Ohio State's wide receivers are still good. And if you made it to the end of the show, hopefully you understand why we're saying that.
Yeah. 24 minutes of words to get back to. They're good. They're going to be good.
And they're going to stay good. All right. Yeah. Rolling along through the position reviews and previews. This was Wide Receiver Wednesday. We've got not too many left. I think maybe we didn't need to split up the reviews and previews, although I'm glad that we did. We've got another 2020 Forever interview knocked out. I think we're going to drop that on Friday with Carlos Lachlan. So some stuff from Ohio State's running backs coach that you can look forward to there. So couple series in the works, and maybe we'll have some mailbags and opportunities to get into your thoughts, because we're now inside a month until spring football actually does resume. So the next countdown is on. Until then, though, this has been the Podcast Daily on a Wednesday, talking wide receivers with Bill Landis. I'm Austin Ward. We'll talk to you tomorrow.